Every single society, from the smallest tribe to the biggest nation, has to answer the same basic question. It's about survival, it's about who we are, and it's definitely about the future. Really, it's all a question of power.
So how do you do it? How do we build order out of chaos? How do we get ourselves organized to do big things, protect each other, and create something that lasts? Over the centuries, humanity has come up with a ton of different answers, all these different blueprints for power. And we're going to take a look at some of the most important ones.
So here's our game plan. We'll start with the basics, then dive into systems built on personal loyalty, then brutal conquest, and then total state control. After that, we're going to flip the script completely and look at a radical alternative: power without violence. And finally, we'll bring it all home and ask where we can see these old blueprints still at work in our world today.
All right, so at the very heart of any system of power, there's this fundamental tension. A big question: is your loyalty owed to a person, through a direct promise or a bond? Or is it owed to something bigger, more abstract, like an institution or a set of laws?
Think of it like this. Is your main obligation to a specific person you swore an oath to, someone who, in turn, owes you something back? Or is your duty to a set of laws, an institution, a state that's bigger than any single individual? Getting this distinction, that's the absolute key to understanding all the different blueprints we're about to explore.
Let's start with the most personal form of power you can imagine. In a world without a strong central government, order wasn't built on abstract laws, it was built on relationships. Power was just a big web of direct, personal loyalties. This quote from a fable written way back in the 12th century just perfectly captures the whole idea. Imagine society as a body. The nobles, they're the belly, providing stability. Their vassals, who do the work, are the hands and feet. But if the hands and feet stop working, well, the belly starves and the entire body collapses. It's such a powerful metaphor for this idea of mutual, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours obligation.
And this system really played out in two major ways. First, you have feudalism. A vassal would swear a very public, very formal promise, an oath of fealty, to a lord. In return, they'd get a piece of land to live on and work, called a fief. Then there's the patron-client system, which is a little more informal. A client offers their personal loyalty to a powerful patron, and in exchange, they get protection and favors. But see the common thread? In both cases, power flows through a direct, personal relationship, not some faceless state.
But what happens when power isn't about handshakes and promises? What if it's just imposed from the outside, by force? Well, that brings us to the next blueprint, the empire, built on military genius and just sheer unstoppable will.
And there's really no better example than Genghis Khan. His reputation for cruelty was legendary. He united the Mongol tribes and then just unleashed them on the world, creating one of the biggest empires in history. His strategy was often just brutal math. It was simply easier and more efficient to massacre the people in a city that fought back than to waste valuable troops trying to control it.
But here's the crazy paradox of the Mongol Empire. This unbelievably brutal conquest had some astonishingly positive long-term effects. By controlling such a huge area, the Mongols made the Silk Road safer than it had ever been. So trade, ideas, and new technologies started flowing freely between East and West. And their conquest of China? It actually created the unified territory that forms the basis of the modern nation we see today.
And yet, this timeline shows you the critical weakness of an empire built mainly on the genius of its founders. It rose with breathtaking speed, but less than 150 years after it started, not long after Genghis's grandson Kublai died, the empire shattered and the Mongols were kicked out of China. The power was just too tied to the conquerors themselves.
This brings us to the most extreme blueprint for control we're going to talk about. What happens when that ambition for conquest isn't aimed outward at other countries, but it's turned inward, at its own people, trying to dominate every single aspect of their lives? This is totalitarianism. And it's not just about controlling what people do, it's about controlling what they think and what they feel. It wants to completely remake society, and you as an individual, to serve the state. There's just no room for a private life that's separate from its ideology. And it's so important to see how this is different from simple authoritarianism. Look, an authoritarian ruler basically just wants you to be obedient, stay out of politics, and they'll probably leave you alone. But a totalitarian regime, it accepts no limits. It doesn't just want your obedience, it demands your active, enthusiastic participation. It politicizes everything, your art, your family, your friendships, and bends it all to the will of the state. The political thinker Hannah Arendt had one of the most incredible insights into this. She argued that totalitarianism thrives when people are socially isolated, when they're lonely, rootless, and anxious.
It offers them a purpose, a sense of belonging, but at the cost of their own humanity. She called it a uniquely modern and radical evil, because its goal wasn't just power, but the total destruction of what makes us individuals.
So, after going through power by personal oaths, by conquest, and by total control, it can really start to feel like force is the only language power speaks. But our next blueprint offers a truly radical alternative, a way to challenge injustice and change society without ever resorting to violence.
For most of history, pacifism was seen as a passive, almost religious idea. You know, something for monks, not a practical political strategy. But in the 20th century, that changed, big time. A whole new kind of power started to emerge, and it wasn't wielded by soldiers with guns, but by ordinary people in the streets.
And the person who basically wrote this new playbook was Mohandas Gandhi. His political awakening really happened in South Africa when he was thrown off a train for refusing to leave a first-class carriage. From that moment, he dedicated his life to fighting injustice, but without using violence. He took pacifism and turned it into a powerful political weapon, mastering strategies like mass boycotts and civil disobedience that would eventually win India its independence.
Gandhi's blueprint for nonviolent power went on to inspire movements all over the world. Decades later, Martin Luther King Jr. brilliantly adapted that same playbook for a new struggle, the fight for civil rights in America. He combined Gandhi's methods with Christian teachings to confront segregation, organizing marches, sit-ins, and boycotts that exposed the brutality of the system and forced the entire nation to change.
This shows that nonviolence isn't just passive resistance. It is a highly strategic, three-stage campaign. First, you start with protests, marches, and demonstrations to raise awareness. Then you escalate to non-cooperation. You refuse to participate in the unfair system through things like boycotts. And finally, you can move to intervention. You actively create new parallel institutions that show people how things should be. It's a blueprint for power that relies on immense courage, not on weapons.
Okay, so we've journeyed through these different blueprints. Power based on personal bonds, on conquest, on total control, and on nonviolent resistance. But how does any of this old history relate to the world we're all living in today?
Well, officially, our world is organized by one main blueprint, the nation-state. The whole idea, backed by the United Nations, is that people with a shared identity should have their own sovereign state. In theory, it's a system based on absolute law, not personal loyalty or who has the biggest army. But in reality, is it ever really that simple?
So I want you to look around our modern world. Do you see the echoes of that old feudal loyalty in things like political favors and patronage? Can you see the logic of conquest playing out in international conflicts? What about the tactics of nonviolent protest in today's social movements? The thing is, these old blueprints never really vanished. They're still here, operating inside and alongside the nation-state, still shaping how power is built, how it's challenged, and how it's understood.